Archaeologists have recorded several thousands of Gallo-Roman villas in France, but the Seviac villa is the biggest and the most luxurious. Today, it's one of the major archaeological sites in the southwest. In Roman antiquity, the word villa had a totally different meaning from the one it has today. A villa was a farm building situated in the middle of an estate, the fundus. Situated near the city of Montréal-du-Gers, a magnificent bastide of the 13th century, the Seviac villa is a masterpiece of antique rural architecture. It reminds us of an art of living when comfort was in harmony with the surrounding countryside. Those who visit Seviac for the first time will surely be conquered by this rare testimony of an aristocratic residence built at the end of antiquity. Conquered by Caesar in the middle of the 1st century before Christ, Gaul was only integrated into the Roman civilization 100 years later, between 41 and 54, during the reign of the Emperor Claude. The region of Aquitaine was pacified only after several campaigns that took place from 56 to 19 before Christ, while in the year 27 before Christ, Augustus, the emperor, organized and developed 3 big Roman provinces. This period was followed by the calm and prosperous period that lasted until the 2nd century, and was later called Pax Romana. The Romans built an impressive network of roads to enable the maneuvers of their troops and later the transportation of goods and travelers. Along these roads there appeared big cities embellished with public monuments that enhanced the glory of the Roman Empire. At the end of the 2nd century, the present department of Gers was included in the Novem Populani province, the capital of which was Elusa, today Eos. An important road crossed this province and linked Bordeaux with the Pyrenees. It was the Ténarèse road that later gave its name to the region of Montréal-du-Gers. A metalled road bordering the surrounding wall of the villa enabled one to get back to the Ténarèse 2 kilometers to the west. The ruins and archaeological finds that were found on the territory of the villa prove that it was inhabited for a very long period, from the 2nd until the 7th century. The villa constantly changed its appearance. Being initially an agricultural farm, it later became a luxurious villa, and finally, in the 7th century, it turned into a peasant community with its own church and cemetery. The great barbarian migrations of the 5th and 6th centuries consigned the Seviac villa to oblivion, and it was only rediscovered in the 20th century. During the construction of the Hospitalet farm at the end of the 19th century, the foundations reveal the existence of Gallo-Roman vestiges. The first boring was made by Father Monnier, the parish priest of La Barrère, a village situated several kilometers from Montréal-du-Gers. The dig started in 1911 and was financed by Dr. Lanlong, a professor of the medicine department of Paris University. But in 1913, the death of the professor suspended the financing of the dig, and Seviac sank into oblivion once again. It was only in the spring of 1959 that a lady, walking across a cultivated field at the Hospitalet farm, rediscovered the site of Seviac. Her name was Paulette Aragon-Launay, and her discovery of Seviac was not fortuitous. When she was a child, her father had often told her about the exceptional vestiges that he had visited during the digs of 1911-1913. For several years, in the course of her Sunday walks with her children, Paulette Aragon-Launay had visited the churches and castles of Gascony. Furthermore, she was a member of the Archaeological Society of the Gers and had published several articles about the Ténarèse, Armagnac, and famous artists of the region. Having heard from her father about the mosaics that he had seen on the archaeological site in 1911, Paulette Aragon-Launay had gone to Seviac and had been able to locate the original archaeological site. In 1959, with the assistance of her children, she undertook a dig that uncovered several square meters of the mosaics, which had already been introduced into an inventory list. She immediately informed the Paris authorities about it and received a permit to carry out the dig and to uncover the western extension of Seviac. A 34-meter-long gallery that led to a series of large chambers was brought to light. On the 1st of October 1966, Paulette Aragon-Launay created the Association for the Safeguard of the Monuments and Sites of Armagnac. A few months later, in June 1967, the first lot of Seviac land was bought. The archaeological dig began at that time, and every summer from 1966 until 1996, this Gallo-Roman villa was dug by volunteers from all over the world. In this way, the main body of the residential buildings of the villa was cleared during the period from 1967 to 1977. In 1972, the dig of the inner yard was over, and the yard that separated the Pars Urbana from the thermal baths was marked. The year 1974 was distinguished by two finds of great importance. During this year, in the northeastern part of the villa, there was dug out the mosaic with trees, which is exhibited in the Museum of Montréal-du-Gers. The other find was a white marble head, probably depicting one of the owners. A real treasury of 17 gold coins belonging to the Merovingian age was also found. This fact proved that many years after the end of the Roman Empire, the villa was still inhabited. The dig of the thermal baths was performed between 1976 and 1980. In 1980, the association bought the third lot of land, which made it possible to uncover the northern extension of the peristyle. The structure that were thus found refer to the early Roman Empire, namely to the beginning of the 2nd century. Roofing panels were built to protect the most fragile zones. They remind one of the original roofing panels of the peristyle. In 2003, the association donated this site to the Montréal-du-Gers district in order to ensure its maintenance and administration. The Association for the Safeguard of the Monuments and Sites of Armagnac has kept the scientific part.
L'Ecole africaine, par exemple, on a des motifs.
Paulette Aragon-Launay died in 1992. Homage is paid to her on the site. Her eternal passion left an imperishable impact on the Seviac villa. The Gallo-Roman villa of Seviac dominates a harmonious landscape and reveals the spirit of the aristocratic landowners who lived in the 4th and 5th centuries. That period corresponds to the decline of the Romans, the age in which the villas were known to be built with the utmost luxury. The villa was founded on a small plateau of 12 hectares overlooking the Argentan, a confluence of the Ozu. A Gallo-Roman villa consisted of 3 parts: the part of the house that was occupied by the landowner, the pars urbana. The other part was set aside for agriculture, la pars rustica or pars agraria, and comprised sheds, workshops, cattle sheds, stables, and other utilitarian buildings. Finally, the agricultural part, the fundus, made it possible for the villa to live and to do trade. The constructions that were found out in Seviac, as well as the revealed mosaics, belong to the residential part of the villa, or pars urbana, of the 4th century.
Et tout autour, des couronnes de feuilles de laurier sur fond bleu, sur fond rouge, qui s'entrecroisent et qui achèvent la figure. Après quoi, vous trouverez un motif plus sobre qui va ramener à la frise.
The guides sometimes conduct the visits in historical garments, which makes it possible for the visitors to immerse themselves in history.
Imaginez ces allées de fleurs, ces statues, ces sculptures, qui nous amènent vers la fontaine. Alors, quand il fait très chaud, je dis on entend...
New 3D image technologies and updated knowledge have made it possible to reproduce the villa as it looked in the 4th century. It was big. It covered an area of 6,500 square meters. The Romans never founded their villas at random. The chosen site met several precise criteria. The priority was the level of fertility of the soil. The proper exposure to the sun was also important. Most of the Gallo-Roman villas were situated on the southern or eastern sides of the hills. They were built close to a big commercial road or a waterway. Still, The immediate proximity to such a route was avoided so that the inhabitants of the villa shouldn't be disturbed by bandits, soldiers, or travelers. Finally, the villas were situated not far from a big town, ensuring the distribution of the produce of the farm. Thus, Seviac is situated only 12 kilometers far from Eos. The landowner of the villa could go to town and come back on the same day. At the very entry, the visitors can see an ancient vestibule and big and magnificent adjacent halls that serve to welcome visitors. These two halls were the triclinium, or winter dining room, as the important hypercoast heating system testifies. A constantly fed heating chamber produced warm air that circulated under the floor and inside the walls. An underfloor space was constructed with the help of clay supports. These two rooms were rebuilt in the 5th century and now make one single big coal basilica hall that serve to meet the subjects or the clients of the landowner. Starting from the 2nd century, Greek culture penetrated the Roman Empire. As regards home architecture, this influence is conveyed by additions to the initial structure of the typical Roman house. Additional rooms were built around a garden with a peristyle. This characteristic was also found in rural architecture. The peristyle gives on to the big inner yard, 30 meter long, bordered by a 4 meter wide column gallery. Around this yard there were built 30 chambers of different size, some of which had hypercoast heating. In the middle there was the hortus, a garden planted with different species and decorated with statues. It had a geometrical structure and was adorned with waterfalls and a pool. Nowadays, collection irises and wild orchids add a special charm to this place. There was a gutter surrounding the yard that evacuated the rainwater falling from the roofs. The rainwater was poured out into a big drainage collector that flowed into the valley. The columns of the villa are made of Pyrenean marble brought from Seviac quarries. The capitals of these columns are of Corinthian style, which means they were decorated with acanthus leaves. The southern exterior gallery gives on to a second inner yard. This area served as a passage between the dwelling rooms and the thermal baths. We should emphasize the huge size of these thermal baths, which are more than 500 square meter large. Paved with splendid mosaics, these thermal baths of exceptional size make us realize what life was like in such vast and luxurious rural villas of the Gallo-Roman times. Such baths were already there in the 2nd century when the first villa was built, and before the beginning of the 5th century they were subject to 6 reconstructions until their area reached 520 square meters. It was more a place of communication and negotiations than of swimming. The thermal baths of the villa were built following the classical plan and had 3 divisions. The caldarium, rooms and pools equipped with hypercoarse heating where the temperature was very high. It was equivalent to a sauna. The size of the hypercoarse heating system gives us an idea of the heat that prevailed. The tepidarium, rooms heated by hypercoarse system in which the temperature was lukewarm. The frigidarium was situated in the middle and was fitted with marble pools filled with cold water, and these rooms were not heated. Finally, the cloakrooms or apoditarium gave on to the lavatories. A swimming pool, or natatio, was built to the south of the frigidarium. It had the form of an apse. 3 steps led to the pool. The floor of the pool was covered with mosaics, while the edge was decorated with grey and pink marble plates. The size of the sewage system shows that an important amount of water was necessary. The water was supplied through clay canals or wooden pipes. Rural Gallo-Roman buildings were usually built on a basement that consisted of trenches filled with grid chalk or stones. The stone walls were made of 2 plates, between which there was stuffed a blockage of clay, flint, terracotta. The structure was mortared with a lime solution. Such walls could be covered with marble plates. The double partitions and double ceilings in Seviac attest that it was a highly advanced architecture. The walls were made of rubble stone and mortared. The roof was covered with flat rectangular tiles, the tegulae, supported by the semi-cylindrical curved fastening, the imbrices. The walls were brightly coloured, covered with drawings of masks, flowers and faces, sometimes even presented gladiatorial contests, chariot races or hunting scenes. Acanthus and vine leaves were widely used in this decoration. Other wall decorations were plinths, friezes and cornices made of plaster models. The plaster was a mixture of lime and marble or calcium powder. Finally, the villa was decorated with marble statues and busts, including those of the landowner himself, that were certainly made in Rome.
Je vais avoir le grand plaisir d'être votre guide pour cette petite balade. Nous allons prendre cette direction.
The landowner of the estate, or the dominus, led an idle life. He ruled over his estate with the help of his manager, the villicus, and the manager's wife, the villica.
Pendant les quelques pas qui nous séparent encore de Seviac, nous allons remonter les époques.
The landowner must have had a house in the neighbouring town of Eos, where he held an administrative or municipal office. Thus, he spent his time as he pleased, both in town and in the country. Staying in his villa at Seviac, he could supervise the agricultural works and go hunting. Hunting had several purposes. It helped to protect the crops, the herds and poultry yards, and it brought in skins and furs. The produce of hunting were also found in the kitchen of the villa, or culina, where the game was cooked for the landowner and his family. The landowner's wife, the matrona, was surrounded with honor, being the keeper of the hearth. She had a certain authority inside the house. She ruled over her servants and children, whom she was to bring up, and we had a profound respect for her. A Roman woman cared a lot about her beauty. She spent a lot of time busy with her coiffure and makeup. A lot of dice and counters were found on the archaeological site. Games were part of the everyday life of the Romans, both children and grown-ups. The estate produced its own wine as well. Vine is a widely present topic in the Seviac mosaic decoration, which points out the importance of vine in the regional agricultural production. Still, many other foods were also imported. Oysters from the ocean, fish from Spain, oil from Africa. Meals were served in silver dishes and in precious glasses. Kitchen utensils found at Seviac were later exhibited in the Museum of Montréal-du-Gers. The landowner and his family dined reclining on benches in the triclinium or dining room. The economic importance of the villas was based on the exploitation of lands for agriculture and cattle breeding. Agriculture was an important element of the prosperity of this region during the early Roman Empire, the period during which most of the villas reached their biggest extension. The villa accommodated numerous people who were busy with agriculture and various crafts. Thus, were also established complex relations between country people and town people. The country was highly dependent on towns, both because of the imported goods supply and because they were the place of distribution of the agricultural produce. On the other hand, the towns could not survive without the country, a relation that constituted the basis of antique economy was established between these two worlds. A lot of craftsmen also lived in the villa. Archaeologists often find forges, kilns, weaving looms on the site of the villas. Many Roman weights used for weaving were found at Seviac. They're kept in the Museum of Montréal-du-Gers. Such tools were enough to satisfy current and modest needs. The works, which were once done at home, became specialized crafts. The production of terracotta, for instance, provided essential containers for transport, storage, crockery, as well as construction materials, tiles and bricks. But the most interesting feature of the Seviac villa decoration is, of course, the 30 mosaic pavements that were discovered. The 450 square meters of mosaic visible on the site that were preserved in a remarkable condition are only a part of the 1,500 existing square meters. Most of them date back to the second half of the 4th century. The word mosaic derives from the Latin opus musivum, which means a work inspired by the muses. They were made from tesseris, mosaic pieces fixed on mortar. These tesseris are small pieces of stones, terracotta or cut glass. The mosaics were produced by itinerant craftsmen who traveled around the entire region. As for paintings, there existed several mosaic schools. Those of Seviac belonged to the school of Aquitaine, influenced, however, by the African school to some extent. The images created by the authors of the mosaics are always different, but one may distinguish a unity of texture and mainly geometrical and floral patterns in which the acanthus and vine leaves and fruit trees play an important part, which is a characteristic feature of the Aquitaine school. The reception rooms, the thermal bath, the pool and the galleries of the peristyle are all covered with mosaics. The chromatic palette includes 6 shades: white, pinkish white, dark blue, dark or bright yellow ochre, light grey, bluish white, red and dark green. The pieces of mosaic are linked by such materials as calcium marble, clay or green stones. These shades were those of the materials that were used. In the southwestern corner, a 750-meter-long mosaic carpet is preserved. 6 shades are mingled in a pattern of half shells looking like breaking waves and indicating the entrance to the thermal baths. Another mosaic presents floral elements, including a mostly geometrical pattern. The acanthus is one of the most frequent ornaments in Seviac. It is widely used in decorating the capitals of the Greek Roman columns. The acanthus embellishes many of the villa's mosaics. The vine is the other design widely used by the Aquitaines. This is a witness to the agricultural wealth of the region. In the big hall of the western extension of the peristyle, there are 5 medallions decorated in the center with vine branches laden with leaves and grapes. This is the best preserved mosaic carpet found in the dwelling chambers of Seviac. The vine pattern may be seen once again in the triclinium or dining room in the eastern extension of the peristyle in a pyramid of laurels adorned with fruit and leaves. In 1974, a gorgeous mosaic called the Tree Mosaic was dug out. It is kept in the Museum of Montréal-du-Gers. It depicts a matchless collection of fruit trees. Starting from the 5th century, Germanic tribes started to settle on the territory of the Roman Empire. In return for lands, the barbarians served in the Roman armies. After having ravaged Rome in 410, the Visigoths settled in the Aquitaine from the year 418. The Visigoths were very Romanized and managed to integrate perfectly into the Gallo-Roman population. Archaeological finds in Seviac, such as belt buckles, attest the presence of the Visigoths in the villa and that it was still inhabited after the fall of the Roman Empire in 476. Then the Franks invaded the country. They won the battle against the Visigoths at Vouillé in 507. Finally, in the 7th century, the Vascons, an Iberian people, flooded down from the Pyrenees. The villa of Seviac was still populated in later times during the Merovingian times. 7 gold Merovingian coins were found that demonstrate that the villa was inhabited until the 7th century. This treasure is nowadays kept in the Museum of Saint-Rémy in Toulouse. The inner courts, the chambers and the galleries were reconstructed and walled in. The villa underwent essential changes and turned into a village. One can visit 2 Merovingian chapels and one big necropolis of about 100 of tombs in the southeastern part of the villa. In the chapel, there is a baptismal cistern that is thought to have been installed here in 500 AD. The thermal baths were abandoned and partially destroyed. A 7th century document stated that the Charter of Nicesius was a deed of donation by which the villa of Savignago, one of his 27 villas, was donated to the abbot of Moissac. The occupation may have lasted until the 11th century. Nobody knows exactly why this place was abandoned. Today, Seviac is a small village situated a few hundred meters far from the site. Actually, numerous questions still remain unanswered, such as, for instance, the identity of the enigmatic landlord of Seviac in the 4th century. On the 2nd of August, 1972, a deposit of archaeological finds called the Lapidary Museum of Montréal-du-Gers was inaugurated under the patronage of Charles Samaran, a member of the Institute and honorary director of the National Archives. He contributed a lot to the building of the town hall together with the Tourist Information Office of the district and carried out the idea of Paulette Aragon-Launay, which she expressed in 1970. The Seviac Villa is situated in the middle of the Armagnac region, very popular among tourists and rich in busted castles and churches. The unique, magnificent Gallo-Roman site arouses interest and curiosity. It has become an asset to attract the tourists. From the very beginning, it was clear that Seviac could become very useful for Montréal-du-Gers and for the department. Thus, nobody has yet given up the idea of establishing a museum in the heart of the village so as to attract the visitors and allow them to enjoy all of its collections on the site. Guarded for centuries by the Seviac lovers, a famous couple of Merovingian skeletons, the villa of Seviac was only rediscovered in the 19th century. It took many years of archaeological dig, sometimes episodically, before it became possible to bring back to life and to the public its riches and beauty. Today, it is one of the most important archaeological and tourist sites of the Gers. Situated in the village of Montréal-du-Gers, it is an excellent starting point for excursions in the surroundings. Very rich in monuments and many different places of interest. This region is also favorable to walking tours. Cultural and gastronomic sites are in high competition, and Seviac is one of its most beautiful assets.